Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, be sure to drop your thoughts, feelings, and lessons in the comments below. Like the video and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's get into it. The cruelest thing my girlfriend ever did was postpone our engagement for the third time, then laugh at me in front of her family and say, like it was a compliment, "Edmund doesn't rush me. He knows his place." She said it loudly at her cousin's graduation party in Norfolk, while people smiled and nodded like I was a well-trained accessory instead of a man with a ring in his pocket. When I didn't react, she leaned closer, eyes bright with certainty, and added, "See, he's fine." The room chuckled. I swallowed the heat in my chest and kept my posture steady. Here's how it happened. My name is Edmund Caldwell. I am a black man raised with the kind of quiet discipline that doesn't need an audience. I was taught that confidence is not noise, it is consistency. I work in operations management, the sort of job where you learn to plan for failure before it arrives, to document everything, to keep your voice level even when the stakes are high. For years, I believed those skills could protect my heart as well as they protected my work. I was mistaken. Love, I learned, is the one place where preparation cannot substitute for honesty. I met Beatrice Whitfield in Richmond, Virginia, at a charity gala hosted by a local historical society. She was elegant without effort, the sort of woman who could hold a conversation with a judge, a teacher, or a teenager and make each feel personally chosen. Her laugh was warm when she wanted it to be. That detail matters because later I would understand her warmth was a setting she controlled. That night she asked about my work, nodded thoughtfully, and said, "You seem like a man who keeps his word." I remember how proud I felt hearing it. Our first year together looked like the beginning of something sturdy. Bea introduced me to her mother, Winifred, in Charleston, South Carolina, where the Whitfields still spoke about family like it was a title you earned. Winifred was polite in the way some people are polite when they are evaluating you. Her smile never reached her eyes, but she called me Mr. Caldwell and offered sweet tea like a test. Bea squeezed my hand under the table and later whispered, "Do not worry. She will adore you." I believed her because I wanted to. I thought love was proof enough. Bea had friends with old, careful manners and sharp, modern instincts. Reginald, Florence, Theodore, Harriet, and a cousin named Percival who spoke in half-jokes that always landed like small insults. They met me at restaurants, rooftop gatherings, and weekend trips along the coast, and every time Bea framed me as dependable. "Edmund is solid," she would say. "Edmund is steady." She said it like praise, but after a while I noticed she never said I was cherished. Never said I was chosen. I did not confront it then. I stored it away like a file I hoped I would never need. When Bea moved into my townhome in Richmond, she brought her preferences with her like furniture. She rearranged my pantry, replaced my soap, criticized my music, and called it improving the space. She did it with a smile and a kiss, and I told myself that compromise was normal. Yet even in the early days, she had a habit of pushing against my boundaries just to see if they moved. If I said I was tired, she planned a late dinner anyway. If I had work the next morning, she insisted we attend a gathering for appearances. She treated my schedule like a suggestion and her desires like a calendar. The first postponement came after 18 months. I planned a weekend in Savannah, Georgia, because Bea loved old architecture, lantern-lit streets, and the sort of romance people photograph for keepsakes. I had the ring. I had rehearsed nothing because I didn't want a performance, just a moment. We walked beside the river, and when I stopped near a quiet bench, B.A.'s smile tightened. She looked at my hands like she already knew. Then she said softly, "Not this spring. My job is too hectic." She said it with the tone of someone postponing a meeting, not a promise. I did not beg. I nodded once and said, "All right." My confidence stayed intact, but my chest felt bruised. I told myself she was practical. I told myself that a delayed engagement was not a denied one. Bea kissed me after, longer than usual, as if affection could substitute for agreement. On the drive back, she hummed to the radio like nothing important had happened. When I looked out the window at the passing fields, I realized I was the only one carrying the weight of that moment. She had set it down with ease. Weeks later, Bea began speaking to people as if an engagement was inevitable and distant, like a holiday she could schedule when convenient. "We're getting there," she told Florence at brunch. "Edmund is patient." Florence laughed and said, "Men like that are rare. Keep him." Bea smiled like she appreciated the advice. I sat there calm, buttering toast, feeling my dignity being discussed like a commodity. When Bea noticed my silence, she squeezed my knee under the table, not lovingly, but as a signal. "Behave." That was the first time I understood she wanted my composure to serve her image. The second postponement arrived near the holidays in Charlotte, North Carolina, at a gathering hosted by Reginald and Harriet. I had planned to propose before everyone left for the new year. Bea had talked about winter engagements like she expected it. Then, just before we walked inside, she adjusted her coat and said, "After the holidays, my mother wants the family to be in a better place." She did not explain what better meant. She did not apologize. She said it like a decision already approved by a committee. I studied her face, searching for tenderness. I found only control. That night, Bea laughed too loudly at Percival's jokes. She drank slowly and watched the room like she was monitoring a performance. When she introduced me, she said, "This is Edmund. He understands timing." The sentence sounded harmless, but it landed like a warning. Later, when I mentioned the postponement in the car, she stared forward and said, "Do not make this heavy. It will happen when it happens." Her words were smooth, but they contained a message. My hope was an inconvenience. I kept my voice even and replied, "I hear you." I did not say what else I heard. Suffering does not always look like desperation. Sometimes it looks like a man refusing to crumble while the person he loves tests how far his restraint can be stretched. I continued showing up. I continued planning. I continued being kind in ways that were easy to overlook because they were consistent. I paid for trips, handled errands, fixed what broke, and maintained our home like it was a shared responsibility. Bea accepted these things the way some people accept sunlight, as if it belongs to them. When I took her out, she thanked me in public and dismissed me in private. That contradiction became our rhythm. Around that time, Bea began speaking about marriage as something she was granting me, not something we were building together. "I like a man who can wait," she told Harriet, sipping coffee. "It shows discipline." Harriet glanced at me, uncertain, then looked away. Bea's eyes met mine across the table, daring me to object. I didn't. I stayed calm, because the moment I argued, Bea would label me emotional. She liked that label. It gave her permission to ignore whatever I said. So I learned to speak less and observe more. My friend Clarence Baines, a black man with a quiet mind and an honest stare, noticed a shift before I admitted it. We met for lunch in Richmond, and he said, "You are carrying something you have not named." I told him Bea was stressed, that work had her drained. Clarence nodded slowly and replied, "Stress does not make people disrespectful. It reveals what they already believe they can do." That sentence stayed with me. In my job, I tracked patterns. I forecasted risks. In my relationship, I had been pretending the warning signs were weather I could ignore. The third postponement happened in Charleston, in the same candlelit restaurant we loved. We sat beneath soft lighting while the servers moved like shadows. The ring was in my pocket again, heavy as a truth I'd delayed. Bea had been affectionate that week, calling me darling, touching my arm, speaking about our future like she was feeding me enough hope to keep me quiet. Then the conversation turned to her mother's expectations, and Bea's smile changed. She set down her glass and said, "We're not doing that tonight. No apology, no softness, just an instruction." I did not reach for the ring. I did not ask why. I simply nodded and paid the bill. Bea watched me sign the receipt like she was pleased with my obedience. On the walk to her car, she linked her arm through mine and said, "Thank you for being mature." It was the kind of compliment that hides a threat. Mature meant silent. Maturity meant manageability. When she kissed my cheek, her lipstick left a faint mark, like a stamp. I opened her door, waited until she sat, and closed it gently. Then I stood in the parking lot for a moment and felt something inside me go still. After that, I stopped asking. Not to punish her, not to win. I stopped because I finally understood that my questions were feeding her control. As long as I asked, she got to answer. As long as she answered, she got to decide. When I stopped, I removed the stage. B did not panic. She relaxed. She started treating the absence of a proposal like proof she had trained me. She began making plans that assumed my presence, my money, my stability, without offering me certainty in return. That is how a person behaves when they believe they own your patience. BEA's circle responded to my silence by becoming bolder. Percival would say, "Still no ring, Edmund?" Then grin as if it were harmless teasing. Florence would add, "B is wise. She does not rush." Harriet stayed quiet, eyes dropping to her plate. Reginald laughed and said, "He's a disciplined man. That's rare." Their words sounded like compliments, but they were not describing my character. They were describing my usefulness. I stayed composed because I refused to become entertainment. But inside, I felt the humiliation of being discussed like a tool that hadn't worn out yet. That winter, B began talking about property. She sent me listings from Atlanta, Georgia, with messages like, "This would be perfect for us," and "Imagine our life here." I noticed how she said, "our life." In the same breath, she avoided our engagement. When I asked why Atlanta, she said she was positioning herself for an opportunity. She spoke about it with ambition I respected, yet she never asked what I wanted. She assumed. When I reminded her my work was centered in Virginia, B smiled and said, "You can transfer. You're good at what you do." It was not a question. It was a plan she wrote using my name. Then B made the request. She wanted me to co-sign on a townhome, just for a year. She said her credit was in a strange spot, that she was so close to a promotion. She told me it would help us build our future. The words were carefully chosen. Future us build, term she avoided when the topic was commitment. When I didn't agree immediately, her face cooled. She set her phone down and said, "So after everything, you do not believe in me?" The accusation was sharp and unfair, designed to make me defend myself instead of questioning her. I held her gaze and answered calmly. Belief is not the issue. Responsibility is. BEA's eyes narrowed. She leaned back and said, "You're making it complicated." Her voice carried that familiar certainty. She expected me to yield. Why didn't? She sighed like I was exhausted. Then she did something subtle. She changed the subject and became affectionate again, as if my hesitation would dissolve under enough charm. That night she cooked dinner, kissed my forehead, and spoke sweetly about vacations. I sat there, steady, realizing she was not negotiating. She was managing. In operations, I learned the value of quiet documentation. I began doing the same at home. Not to spy, not to scheme, simply to stop being confused by contradictions. I paid attention to what B asked for, what she avoided, what she dismissed. I noticed how she became tender when she wanted something and indifferent when I needed reassurance. I noticed how her apologies were always conditional. "I'm sorry you took it that way," she would say, never admitting wrongdoing. And I noticed how she spoke about marriage only when it served her goals. Her pattern wasn't chaotic. It was consistent. The more I observed, the less I argued. My confidence became quiet armor. B mistook it for surrender. She began leaving paperwork on the counter. Loan pamphlets, property brochures, a folder labeled Next Steps. She would point at it and smile. "We're moving forward," she'd say. I would nod, non-committal, and she would interpret my calm as agreement. In the meantime, I started separating my life from her reach, piece by piece. Not dramatically, methodically, the way a man closes doors when he realizes a storm is coming. I met with an attorney in Baltimore, Maryland, during a work trip. His name was Augustus Sloan, and he spoke with the calm precision of someone who had watched many people confuse love with obligation. I told him I wasn't married and didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. Augustus asked, "Do you share accounts? Do you share property? Do you share liabilities?" I answered honestly, and he nodded as if he'd heard it before. "The law cares about documents," he said, "not promises. If you want peace, you must put your life in writing." I didn't tell B about the attorney, not because I was hiding guilt, but because I didn't need permission to protect myself. I opened a new account and redirected my direct deposit. I closed the joint savings B referred to as the wedding fund, a fund she had never contributed to consistently. I moved my passport, social security card, and other documents into a safe deposit box. I changed passwords and enabled extra verification. These were not acts of hostility. They were acts of adulthood. If B truly loved me, she would respect boundaries. If she didn't, she would expose herself the moment those boundaries appeared. B noticed the changes the way a person notices the temperature dropping, slowly, then with irritation. "Did the bank have an issue?" she asked one evening, feigning casualness. I looked up from my laptop and said, "No issue. I'm reorganizing." B blinked, then smiled as if she approved. "Good," she said. "I like a man who is proactive." That was the problem. She always liked my strength when it benefited her. She never liked it when it limited her. I watched her carefully as she walked away, and I felt my certainty solidify into something harder than hope. The Norfolk graduation party arrived in early spring. B insisted we attend, saying it was important for family unity. We drove down in my car, and B spent the ride scrolling through her phone, smiling at messages she didn't share. At the event, Winifred greeted me with polite indifference. Percival shook my hand and said, "Still no ring?" B laughed before I could answer. "Edmund understands timing," she said, loud enough for nearby relatives to hear. "He knows his place." The sentence landed like a slap dressed as humor. B held her smile, daring me to disrupt her moment. I didn't flinch. I didn't scowl. I didn't plead for respect. I simply looked at B and said, evenly, "Enjoy your celebration." Then I turned to congratulate her cousin. The party continued, but something in BEA's eyes shifted. Not remorse, but annoyance that I hadn't reacted. Later she leaned close and whispered, "Do not be strange." I replied, "I'm not strange. I'm quiet." B exhaled sharply and walked away. That night, in the car, she accused me of embarrassing her by being cold. I said, "I matched the temperature you set." Weeks later, BEA's Atlanta plan accelerated. She began taking calls in other rooms, closing doors, speaking in a tone that sounded like persuasion. When she came out, she would smile too brightly and ask about my day as if nothing happened. One afternoon, I saw a notification flash on her phone, an email from a lender. B snatched the phone quickly, then looked at me and said, "Do you trust me, Edmund?" The question was a trap. Trust should not require blindness. I answered calmly, "I trust what I can verify." BEA's smile tightened. "So you don't trust me," she concluded. "You're making this ugly." A few days later, B tried again, softer. She cooked dinner and placed wine on the table, then spoke about our future as if she was laying down a quilt. "Atlanta would be a fresh start," she said. "You and I would finally have something that is ours." I paused and replied, "We already have something that's ours, if you want it to be ours." BEA's eyes flickered, annoyed by the implication. "Edmund," she said gently, "you always want to turn things into a lesson." I smiled once. "No," I said, "I just want alignment." B didn't respond to that. She changed the subject to paint colors. It became clear that BEA's definition of ours meant a deed with my name and her control. She wanted the benefits of partnership without the accountability of commitment. And because she never expressed remorse, I stopped expecting tenderness. I began expecting conflict. In my work, I learned that people reveal themselves under pressure. B was under pressure, ambition, appearances, her mother's expectations, and she responded by trying to use me as a solution. When a person uses you, they get angry when you resist. BEA's anger was not explosive. It was strategic. She withheld affection. She mocked my caution. She appealed to guilt. Clarence visited one weekend, and while B was out, he walked through my living room, noticed the tension in the air, and said, "You have already decided something." I poured coffee and replied, "I've decided to stop negotiating my dignity." Clarence nodded, then said, "Good. Dignity is expensive when you pay for it late." That sentence felt like a hand on my shoulder. When B returned, she was charming to Clarence, laughing and calling him Mr. Sensible. But when Clarence left, B said, "Your friends always act like I'm the problem." Her voice held no sadness, only irritation. I answered, "They notice what I notice." Then B crossed a line that removed the last excuse I had been clinging to. I came home from work and found B at the counter with a stack of papers. She looked up, and smiled brightly. "Good news," she said. "I applied for the townhome." I stared at the papers and asked, "You applied without me?" Bea waved a hand. "It's fine," she said. "They just need verification. I used your information from your old pay stubs. I knew you'd come around." There was no shame in her voice, no apology. She said it like she'd saved time. In that moment, I felt my love turn into clarity. I kept my voice calm. "You had no right to use my information." Bea rolled her eyes. "Do not be dramatic," she said. "We're building a life. You always act like paperwork is personal." I replied, "Paperwork is the only thing the world respects when feelings fail." Bea scoffed and said, "You're punishing me because I wasn't ready to get engaged." She turned it back to the engagement, as if her postponements gave her permission to trespass in my life. I looked at her steadily and said, "You don't get to borrow my name because you refuse to honor it." Bea's expression hardened. "So what?" she said. "You're going to sabotage me?" The way she spoke, like my boundaries were sabotage, told me everything. I didn't argue further. I went to my bedroom, opened my laptop, and sent a simple email to the lender's contact information I found on the documents. I stated that I had not authorized any application using my personal information, and I requested confirmation that my identity would be protected. I did not threaten. I did not exaggerate. I wrote the truth. Then I closed the laptop and sat on the edge of my bed, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The next morning, Bea was sweet again, almost theatrical. She made breakfast and talked about weekend plans, as if affection could rewind the night before. I let her speak. I drank my coffee. My calm was not confused anymore. It was finality. At work, my phone rang during a meeting. I stepped out and listened to a lender's representative politely confirm that the application would be flagged for additional verification. They asked if I wanted to place a fraud alert. I said yes. My voice did not shake. When I returned to the meeting, my team was discussing risk mitigation. I almost smiled at the irony. I had been doing the same thing in my personal life. That evening, Bea came home tense, her pleasant mask cracked. She dropped her bag and said, "What did you do?" I looked at her and replied, "I protected myself." Bea's eyes flashed. "They treated me like I was trying to steal," she snapped. "Do you know how humiliating that is?" I held her gaze. "No," I said. "You know how humiliating it is. You created it." Bea's mouth tightened as she shook her head. "You always have to be right," she said. She did not say she was sorry. She did not ask how she'd hurt me. She only cared that she had been inconvenienced. Bea called Winifred and cried into the phone, but the tears sounded like performance, not remorse. "He's trying to control me," she said, loud enough for me to hear from the hallway. Winifred's voice carried faintly through the speaker, stern and approving. When Bea ended the call, she looked at me and said, "My mother thinks you're insecure." I nodded once. "Your mother thinks whatever you need her to think," I replied. Bea's face darkened. "So now you're insulting my family?" she demanded. I answered no. "I'm describing the pattern." Bea scoffed. "You're impossible." The lender's verification process triggered a chain reaction Bea hadn't predicted. The property manager requested more documentation. The agent became cautious. Bea, who relied on confidence and charm, now faced questions that required proof. Every time she tried to glide past them, she hit a wall. She reacted the way she always reacted when reality didn't cooperate. She blamed someone else. She blamed me. She blamed the lender. She blamed timing. She never blamed herself. Watching her scramble didn't make me feel victorious. It made me feel sober. I realized how close I'd come to being tied to her legally, financially, and emotionally with no protection. Bea tried to reclaim control by reframing the story publicly. She told Florence and Harriet that I was stressed and acting strange. She told Percival I was dragging my feet. At a dinner in Richmond, she teased me again. "Edmund is being careful," she said, smiling. "He's suddenly an expert on boundaries." The table laughed politely. I set down my fork and said calmly, "Boundaries are what keep a person from being used." The laughter thinned. Bea's smile froze. Harriet stared at her plate. Percival's grin faltered. Bea's eyes narrowed as if I'd violated an unspoken rule, never name the truth. After dinner, B cornered me in the kitchen and hissed, "Why would you say that?" I turned to face her and replied, "Because it's true." B shook her head, angry. "You're trying to make me look bad," she said. I answered, "You don't need my help." BEA's face twisted with offense. "You think you're better than me," she accused. I stayed level. "No," I said. "I think I'm responsible for myself." B stared at me as if she could not comprehend a man who would not trade his peace for her approval. Then she said something quiet and sharp. "You'll regret this. Threats only work when you fear losing what someone offers." BEA's threat slid off me because I had already accepted the loss. That night, I slept in a guest room, not to punish her, but because I refused to share intimacy with someone who treated me like a resource. In the morning, I dressed neatly, went to work, and handled my responsibilities with the same discipline I always had. B texted me once, "ACT normal." The irony would have been laughable if it didn't hurt. I stared at the message, then turned off my phone. Normality had been the problem. Normal had been my silence. The lender called again later that week. They confirmed the application could not proceed without my direct authorization, and due to inconsistencies, it would be withdrawn. They advised me to keep my fraud alert active. I thanked them. When I hung up, I felt something like relief, but deeper. It was the relief of a man who has finally stopped negotiating with a fire. B came home and slammed a cabinet. "It's dead," she said. "The whole thing is dead because of you." I looked at her and replied, "No. It's dead because you tried to build it on my name without my consent." BEA's anger became cold. She stopped cooking. She stopped touching me. She walked through the house like a queen inspecting a servant. When she spoke, it was clipped and contemptuous. "You love paperwork more than people," she said. "You want control." I answered only when necessary, because arguing with someone who never feels remorse is like pouring water into sand. Meanwhile, I kept moving quietly. I scheduled another meeting with Attorney Augustus. I asked about my lease, my options, and the cleanest way to untangle my life from hers. Augustus listened and said, "Peace is a decision." The decision became clear when we brought up engagement again, not with love, but with leverage. One evening she sat across from me, chin lifted, and said, "If you want me to stay, you need to prove you're serious." I almost smiled. The woman who postponed me 3 times now demanded proof. I replied, "I was serious when I asked. I was serious every time you delayed. I'm still serious about not begging." BEA's eyes sharpened. "So you're refusing?" she asked. I answered, "I'm choosing." He scoffed. "Then choose loneliness." Her voice held no sadness, only pride. I nodded once. "All right." Be packed in stages, not because she was conflicted, but because she wanted attention. She moved her clothes first, then her shoes, then her cosmetics, each item removed like a message. She expected me to stop her. I didn't. She called Winifred dramatically, telling her I had changed. She told Florence I was cold. She told Harriet she couldn't live with a man who didn't support her dreams. Not once did she say she had crossed a line. Not once did she admit she'd tried to use my information. She left the house with her head high, as if she were the victim of my boundaries. I watched her go, hand to my pockets, breathing steadily. The moment she drove away, the house felt lighter, not happy, not celebratory, just quiet. Quiet like a room after a loud machine shuts off. I walked through the living room and noticed how much of my life had been organized around not upsetting B. I had chosen restaurants to match her mood, trips to match her aesthetic, conversations to match her tolerance. I had been confident, but I had also been careful in the wrong way. I sat at my dining table and wrote a single sentence in my notes, then read it twice. If she wanted to be my wife, she would not rehearse life without me. I saved it and closed the phone. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't post online. I didn't call her friends to tell my side. I returned to my routine with surgical focus. I went to work. I trained. I cooked. I slept. I handled the practical details, changing locks, separating utilities, updating accounts, finalizing paperwork. Each task felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Clarence came by and helped me move a few items. He didn't ask for gossip. He simply said, "You look tired." I replied, "I'm healing." Clarence nodded. "Healing looked quiet on you," he said. He tried to return through the side doors of communication. She emailed about items she forgot. She texted about a misunderstanding. The messages never contained remorse, only a desire to keep a thread attached. I responded politely about logistics, nothing more. When she asked to meet to talk, I declined. Not cruelly, calmly. BEA's final message was sharp. "You'll never find someone like me." I stared at the screen and thought, that is the point. I blocked her. The block wasn't angry. It was closed. I refused to keep donating my piece to someone who treated it like spare change. 2 months later, a recruiter reached out about a role in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a step up, more responsibility, more pay, more room to grow. I would have hesitated before, worried about BEA's timeline, BEA's preferences, BEA's mother's opinions. This time I considered only my life. I accepted. I moved quietly, without speeches or announcements. I rented a clean apartment with tall windows and simple furniture. I bought a new table, a new bed, and dishes that matched because I wanted them to match. The first night of my new place, I sat on the floor with takeout and felt gratitude so deep it was almost painful. In Philadelphia, my life became mine again. I worked long days, came home to silence, and realized silence can be a form of safety. I started running early in the mornings, not for attention, but for endurance. I made friends slowly. I read books at night, instead of negotiating with someone's mood. My confidence returned in a cleaner form, no longer tied to proving I could endure disrespect. It was confidence rooted in choice. I didn't need to announce anything to feel successful. I simply lived my life without asking permission. The private victory was not money or a title. It was peaceful. BEA's karma was not dramatic, but it was fitting. Because her application had been flagged, she found herself under scrutiny in other places. She complained to people about bank drama, but she couldn't make it sound noble. She tried to rent in Atlanta, but higher deposits and extra verification followed her, and she blamed the world. She jumped between short-term options, leaning on friends who grew tired of her certainty. Florence stopped returning calls. Percival stopped teasing. Harriet, I heard through Clarence, simply said, Edmund saw the truth. BEA's world was built on image, and once the image cracked, people stepped back. The strange thing about a person without remorse is that they keep walking proudly into the consequences. B reached out again through an unknown number months later. I'm in D.C. for a conference, she wrote. We should meet. Be adults. I read it, felt nothing, and deleted it. Being an adult, in my experience, meant choosing what preserves your dignity. I didn't need closure from B. I had created my own. The man she tried to manage was gone. In his place was a man who still loved deeply, but never at the cost of self-respect. That was the difference between endurance and self-abandonment. Late that summer, I traveled to Washington, D.C. for work. After a meeting, I walked to a coffee shop near the hotel. The city felt busy and bright, full of people moving with purpose. As I stepped out with my cup, I saw B across the street. She stood near the curb, gesturing sharply, speaking fast to a man in a suit who looked impatient. BEA's posture was the same. Chin lifted, eyes intent, trying to persuade reality into obedience. She glanced up and saw me. Her expression tightened like a door closing. She mouthed my name as if it still opened something. I didn't stop. I didn't smirk. I didn't perform. I gave her a small nod, the kind you give a stranger whose face you recognize from another life, then walked past without slowing down. I felt my heartbeat remain steady. I felt my shoulders stay relaxed. B stood frozen for a moment, then turned back to the man she was trying to convince. The moment lasted seconds, but it carried years. The comeback twist wasn't a speech. It wasn't revenge. It was the quiet proof that her power over me had expired. I stopped asking. Then I stopped being available to be postponed. Back in Philadelphia, I went home, hung my coat neatly, and made dinner. I called Clarence, not to gossip, but to thank him for being steady when I needed steadiness. After the call, I sat at my table and looked around my apartment. Simple, clean, peaceful. I thought about the ring that had sat in my pocket 3 times, waiting for a yes that never came. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt relieved. Some people think patience is love. I learned that patience without respect is self-erasure. He never gave remorse, so karma gave boundaries. And I gave myself the life I kept postponing for her. If you're wondering whether I ever missed her, the answer is complicated. I missed the idea of who I thought she was. I missed the warmth she offered when she wanted something. But I did not miss the constant shrinking. I did not miss being discussed like a tool. I did not miss the way her laughter turned sharp when she sensed vulnerability. I did not miss the feeling of carrying both of our futures alone while she kept her options open. Losing me didn't break me. It clarified me. I stayed confident through cruelty because confidence was never my weakness. My weakness was hoping control would eventually become love. And that is the truth I keep private, because private truths are the ones that actually CH. If this story hit you in the chest, don't just leave. Subscribe for more real, grounded karma stories where the comeback is private and the lesson is permanent. Share this with someone who keeps getting postponed. And comment one word, boundaries, because that's the real victory. Anger you. I didn't win by humiliating her. I won by refusing to be humiliated again. I didn't become successful to prove a point to be. I became successful because I stopped spending my energy begging someone to see my worth. I stopped asking. Then my life opened like a door that had been stuck for years, quietly, suddenly, and finally. The end.